Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome in to a very, very exciting Monday night edition of Establish the Show. That's right, Cody. I think we've hyperbolically said many times throughout this season, oh, this is the game of the year so far. This is the game of the year so far. This game's an exciting one. I mean, look, it doesn't get any better than a Super Bowl repeat of two of the top 3 or 4 teams in the league. And that's what we have tonight with Philadelphia traveling to Kansas City. Really excited for this one. Cody, how are you feeling?
If you're watching along, I've got my fingers crossed. I'm not a superstitious person. I don't believe in jinxes. I don't believe putting things out in the universe will cause them to happen or not happen. But boy, we were pretty excited about that Baltimore Ravens, Cincinnati Bengals slate. And Mark Andrews gets hurt. Jamar Chase obviously fails. Jamar Chase fails because of Joe Burrow getting hurt. Joe Burrow now done for the year. So I'm not going to put anything out of the universe. I am cautiously optimistic about this game being a good one. Both teams walking away healthy, both quarterbacks and offenses walking away healthy. Let's just get through this with a good, as I wrote in the article, a good viewing experience, and hopefully that results in a good gambling experience as well.
Yeah. That was about as poor of a run out from a season-long perspective, especially as we could have had last Thursday. But let's wrap up this week 11 on a high note. And then, of course, happy early Thanksgiving to you all. There'll be tweets and stuff out there soon about all of our Thanksgiving content schedule and everything there. But let's focus here on this one. Cody, to make sure if you're a subscriber to check out the article you see on your screen here, Cody does, as usual, a great job breaking down this one-game slate. And, of course, if you are a subscriber, you'll be lucky enough to get access to this beautiful tab that I will not click on for all of you right here in the Showdown Sim Analysis. Maybe Cody will give you a little sprinkle or a nugget of that at the very end. But Cody, from a macro view, when you were diving into this slate, what stood out for you construction-wise or anything else here?
Yeah, a couple of things. You've got the table up on the screen just with what we expect the roster construction from a team perspective to kind of look like. And, looks pretty straightforward to me. And I really don't see any one particular side of this getting steamed out to any sort of crazy proportions. The one thing I will say, I could potentially see the 5 KC side coming up a little bit. And I'm just noticing now that I think the names on the tables are actually flipped from what the actual percentages should be. So just reverse those 2 4s, 4 2s. I'll adjust that after the show. But 7.6% should be 5 KC, 1 Philly. I could see that side getting a little bit steamed up because as we'll talk through this, there are a few more offensive options on that side at the cheap end that I think could be potentially paired up with like a Mahomes captain type thing where you get like Mahomes plus 3 pass catchers and a Chiefs D or Isaiah Pacheco or something like that, where you get that 5-1 more naturally, especially if you're using an optimizer or some sort of simulation provider, just because the price tags on some of the KC receivers are, for lack of a better word, just appetizing. They're priced lowly enough that you can kind of accept some of the poor outcomes that you're going to get with them because of the way you want to build the rosters on this slate with the expensive guys. And that leads into the second point. Like the salary is fairly tight, but because of the access to some of these lower priced guys, you can make lineups that you feel okay about with AJ Brown and Jalen Hurts and Patrick Mahomes and even Travis Kelce. So I think that's going to result in some very stars and scrubs heavy lineups. And then maybe some of these guys or positions in the mid tier, thinking of kickers specifically, thinking of guys like Isaiah Pacheco and DeAndre Swift and Rashee Rice, some of these kind of mid tier guys that would generally catch a little bit more ownership could end up getting squeezed out in tournaments as a result. So that's one thing I'll be keeping an eye on. We've seen this happen a little bit recently where the most obvious, most expensive options are just catching a little bit more ownership than we even can account for in our ownership projections. And that will often lead to some of these okay plays in the mid-tier getting a little bit squeezed out, making them better plays in tournaments. So keep an eye on final ownership projections. If I get a sense that type of thing is happening, they'll be adjusted. But from a mile high view, I think we're going to see really heavy stars and scrubs roster construction tonight.
Yeah, which, so we'll talk about all those scrub options, obviously, as we go through here, perhaps even in more detail than we normally do, just when you talk about construction. And, of course, the one other external factor that we must talk about in this game is that Taylor Swift will not be in attendance after she was supposed to be, I believe, tour rescheduling, et cetera, et cetera. So do with that what you will with Travis Kelce's projection. Okay, I joke, kind of. I mean, he's just been much better with her attendance. It's kind of
who would have thought that, we come into this week 1 talking about a Kansas City Chiefs slate versus the Lions that kick things off on Thursday night in week 1. And who would have thought in week 11 that one of the biggest storylines of the season would be Travis Kelce's splits with and without Taylor Swift in attendance.
It's a big one. And we should also say that, obviously DraftKings buying into the hype of this game, not only as a Super Bowl repeat, but Millie, they did release a Millie tonight, $22. I'm guessing that's a Taylor Swift reference. I don't know.
Yeah, and it even says in the title of the contest, DraftKings' version. So they're really buying into it.
I hate that, but it is what it is.
Piggybacking off of Taylor Swift's fame, you got to do it any chance you can get.
Yeah, I can't blame any of these media companies for trying to capitalize on it, as annoying as it may be. All right, let's dive in, Cody. The first thing I noticed when I started looking at the slate is like, how are perhaps the two best quarterbacks in the league, perhaps our two MVP favorites right now, just for kind of how the season has shook out. How are they not like 12K? We have an 11-2 and an 11K, Patrick Mahomes and Jalen Hurts. And we should probably be thankful because you just mentioned how tight the pricing is overall. But these are two guys that deserve to be higher than this, that have the highest projections on the slate. Jalen Hurts, particularly, in my view, is the highest floor fantasy asset that exists on a weekly basis. I think that you can make the argument that some of that top tier, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, at times Justin Fields, et cetera, have as high of a weekly ceiling, but I think no one has a higher floor these days than Jalen Hurts. I'd assume cash game lock for both of these guys. Take it wherever you want on the quarterbacks.
Yeah, I think I wrote in the article that both of these guys should be rostered in 100% of cash game contests. They won't be exactly 100%, but they should be. There's just no other starting point than with Patrick Mahomes and Jalen Hurts in cash game contests. You sacrifice whatever else you need to in order to fit these guys in, even ahead of A.J. Brown, even ahead of Travis Kelce, even ahead of Devonta Smith at 9K. There's just no other choice but to play these two options in 100% of your cash game contests. And I don't think you should even consider a lineup in that format without them. To your point about the price tags, though, too, is this is a thing that DraftKings has done to the quarterback position this season. But I think even more so when we have these types of slates where they're going to try and draw in a little bit more of a casual audience with, they got the $22 milli. They want it to be easy to construct lineups that you feel good about and that have the players you want to watch play. You see that happen a little bit. But also when you have some of these expensive skill position players, they just bring the pricing a little bit too close. Like I think Mahomes and Hurts are a little bit too closely priced to even A.J. Brown, to Travis Kelce, to Devonta Smith. They should probably be closer to like 12.6 for Mahomes and 12.4 for Jalen Hurts. And so that brings the interesting discussion to tournaments. Like, we know they're going to definitely be owned. These guys could even push, 75 to 80% for Mahomes. You see 73.5 projected right now on your screen. And same thing for Hurts, 75 to 80% for Hurts. I don't think he's been owned like as a starter less than like 72%. I had the number earlier, something like that. Just crazy consistency on his ownership, obviously crazy consistency on his projection and his output as well. But I'm really wondering what the field is going to do at captain for both of these guys. I think Jalen Hurts will probably end up being higher than 14.4% because of what you mentioned with accessing his rushing upside. Huge design rush share, huge scramble rate. Well, not a huge scramble rate, but enough of a scramble rate to give him access to a really strong rushing floor. Now we know the ability of the tush push. If they get in at the 1 or 2 yard line, that's going to be a Jalen Hurts rushing touchdown. And so I think because of those factors, we're going to see Jalen Hurts' captain ownership come up. I would generally tend to believe that not a traditional pocket passer like Patrick Mahomes, but a guy that has a little bit less of rushing floor ceiling combo with Mahomes, that his captain ownership would come down. But if you want to roster a captain on the Chiefs side, who's it going to be? It's either going to be Mahomes or Kelce, and you have all these other dusty pass catchers that you can pair Mahomes with in flex. But I think that if somebody wants to play a Kansas City Chief captain, it's mostly going to be Patrick Mahomes and or Travis Kelce. So I think you're starting to look at a situation where in tournaments you could see both of these guys actually come up higher than we have projected here. Then we'll certainly talk about the top pass catchers next. But I think that you're going to see a majority of the total captain exposure on the slate come from the quarterbacks and the top pass catchers. And it kind of creates this interesting dynamic here where do we get low enough ownership on some of these secondary and tertiary guys where we can make cases for them in large and small field tournaments. that's one thing I'll be keeping an eye on. But for me specifically on like Mahomes, I think that I'm going to consider Mahomes doubles, Mahomes triples, even in small and large field GPPs. And then for Hurts, I think you can kind of do, whatever you want. Hurts singles will be very popular, especially Hurts singles with AJB. If you can talk yourself into some of these secondary guys, then I think you can get away with some Hurts doubles, but we'll just be cognizant of the ownership there and cognizant of the overall combinations that you're playing them into, because I think it's going to be pretty popular tonight.
Yeah, I think this dictates the entire slate, and maybe that's something that's pretty obvious to say, but we come on these shows twice a week, usually talking about how, hey, there's a stud position player that we'd rather get over the field on in captain and perhaps get it under the field on captain ownership at quarterback. And then, just hammer in those quarterbacks in the flex position. And sim analysis does play that out too, right? Usually the two quarterbacks are going to be your highest exposed players in the flex. I think that's not, to give a little behind the curtain, I don't think that's any different tonight. However, I do find it to be different as far as the upside of captain on both of these guys. You laid out the case on Hurts very well. And then from the Mahomes side, we don't have Tyreek Hill anymore. We don't even have Juju Smith-Schuster anymore, who last year was a kind of steady rock of a guy. It's Kelsey and then a bunch of guys. And like, I'll make a case for Rashee Rice later as a solid captain option, but it's a bunch of guys. And when that's the case, you have a much better chance of it being spread around. We could still get a 404 game out of Patrick Mahomes, of course, but that doesn't mean that one of those other guys is popping. You can maybe make the argument that if he does get a game like that, that almost has to come with some Travis Kelce success, but who knows? At 10K for Kelce, maybe it's, you need him in the flex, and Mahomes just goes so off with everybody involved in the team that it's Mahomes. So usually we like to talk about quarterbacks in the flex more. I have a hard time completely fading these captain ownerships, but I do think the other part that's going to be super interesting to talk about, especially when you talk about pricing being so tight, is the classic, can we get like a tertiary piece in here and just jam as many studs as we can into captain? We talked about that on some slates. I remember in like week 2, 3, 4. We haven't spoken about that as much recently. We'll kind of dive into that now. Anything to add on top of that for quarterbacks here, Cody?
No, I think I mostly agree with you. Just to kind of put a bow on it, because I felt like I rambled a little bit without really kind of giving a concrete take. And this is fluid. It could adjust. But I think ultimately where I'm going to land is probably coming in a little bit overweight on both of these guys in flex, Mahomes and Hurts, and probably a little bit underweight, just like we have discussed in the past and just like you laid out as kind of the sims have shown on these guys in captain. Maybe if I got 12, 13% Mahomes, I feel pretty good about coming around the field on that. And same thing with Hurts, 11, 12, 13% on Hurts. I feel pretty good about that because I do think we're going to get low enough ownership on some of these secondary, tertiary guys that have they're A, cheap enough, and B, have enough upside to kind of get me close to what I think Mahomes and Hurts will do, that I would rather have them in the captain spot.
Yeah. It's a really interesting spot here tonight at quarterback. And to me, you can't go wrong with these guys, getting them into whatever lineups you could fit them into. It's just, do you attack the captain? I agree with you. Probably ultimately a little bit under the field, but not as strong of a stand as I usually take at fading these quarterbacks in captain for sure. All right. Let's go over to the running back position. Let's start on the Philadelphia side. This has certainly become DeAndre Swift's backfield ever since that week 2 breakout. Very clearly a 2-man backfield as well, which kind of makes things a little bit easier for us between DeAndre Swift and Kenneth Gainwell. It is Swift that has definitely the base down work. I think you mentioned like a 12% target share or something like that. 4K more than Kenneth Gainwell, but you mentioned, we need some relief tonight. 4,400 Kenneth Gainwell isn't necessarily that. You could talk yourself into this being a bigger Gainwell spot than we've seen, because if you believe that the Chiefs can control this game in Kansas City, perhaps Philadelphia playing from behind. Something that I found very interesting from your article is that they've only played from behind 21% of their total snaps. That's a crazy number to me. So they've been playing with the lead for 80% of the season. That's wild. So you could kind of talk yourself into, hey, all it takes is one game for things to flip a little bit here. But there's no doubt that Swift is the better ceiling running back here.
Yep, totally agree. And I think it's kind of playing out in terms of projected ownership here. And this is one of the guys that I think, okay, he's 8,400. It's a running back on the road as a 2.5-point dog. We have wide receiver options on the Eagles that we're excited about. We have a quarterback on the Eagles that we're excited about. We're constantly thinking about the tush push and how that kind of affects DeAndre Swift's ceiling. This is one of the guys that I think could end up getting squeezed in both small and large field tournaments. You're seeing, roughly 30% ownership in flex, 7.5% ownership at captain. If both of those numbers came down a little bit, I think he becomes an even better play. But I think where he's projected right now, with the price tag, with projected ownership, he actually looks relatively strong to me still. Handling 56% of the team's rushing attempts. You mentioned the 12% target share. He's doing most of that kind of on that base in that base package because we know he's going to lose a lot of the obvious pass down stuff to Kenny Gainwell in 2 minutes and long down and distance. He's going to lose those. So he's still getting a decent target share, kind of just on first and second down, third and short, and things like that. And then the other thing is he's the one guy that's still getting opportunities inside the 5-yard line when it isn't going to Jalen Hurts. So that maybe AJ Brown gets tackled at the 3 or 4 yard line instead of the 1 yard line. That opportunity might go to DeAndre Swift as opposed to a Jalen Hurts tush push. Right. So I do still think there's slate winning upside here from Swift at 8,400. And if anything, I think that ownership is going to come down as opposed to going up. And we'll talk about this really tough Chiefs secondary in a second here, but they've actually been relatively soft on the ground. They've allowed the league's 7th highest explosive rush rate at 5%, the 3rd lowest stuff rate, and they're allowing the 4th most yards before contact. You got a very good Philly offensive line. I'm not convinced that Philly's going to be able to just go out there and establish it. I think the Chiefs offense is going to force them into more dropbacks, but I do think that Philly will find success on the ground when they can run the ball. All of those things are great for DeAndre Swift. So he is one of those guys that I think if he's going to be 5, 6, 7% owned at captain, probably one of those guys that I want to come in a little bit overweight on.
I don't have anything to add. I think that was a fantastic breakdown. If I'm to attack running backs on this slate, I think I want it to be on this Philadelphia side, no doubt. When you take into account offensive line and like the way you can beat the Chiefs is on the ground. The way you can beat the Eagles is through the air. So like, I think it's kind of it's flipped a little bit where I want to attack the Chiefs pass catchers. Probably I want to attack potentially the Eagles running game, whether that's Jalen Hurts or DeAndre Swift or Kenneth Gainwell, who I think because of that weird no man's land 4-4 tag for him and the possibility of perhaps some more pass down package, set packages. I think it's possible that he falls through the cracks a little bit here. I think 10% is fine. My best ball bags are hoping for a lot of Kenneth Gainwell tonight. Had a good best ball week. Would love to cap it off nicely. So, I think both are interesting. I don't really want to play these guys together, Cody, because like when you are obviously we don't rule this totally out. Sure. But when you throw in we're talking about Jalen Hurts ass a lot here. When you throw in Jalen Hurts and the tush push, and how critical that is to their success, when you try to put a ceiling case on all 3 of those guys from a rushing perspective, it's really hard to see both the actual 2 running backs get there together, especially in a game where they're probably going to be forced to throw a little bit. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I would have a serious correlated or a negative correlation between these 2.
I'm totally with you, especially at captain. If you get that DeAndre Swift captain game, it does likely mean that this team is playing with the lead or at least able to establish the run a little bit more than maybe we're projecting kind of on a surface level thing. And so if that's the case, way more rushing attempts means way less pass game opportunities for somebody like Kenny Gainwell. And as you mentioned off the front, he's not free. We're going to talk about some guys that feel like they're free based off of their base projection. They certainly have bad games within their range of outcomes, and so does Kenny Gainwell, but he's 4,400. So if I'm getting kind of the nut outcome from DeAndre Swift, I really don't want to play Kenny Gainwell into that same type of outcome where he's actually, has a reasonable price tag of 4,400.
Philly Phantom saying in chat should be a rainy game. Yeah, I did want to hit on that quickly. It looks like light rain, but sustained rain, I think, throughout the game. Usually I don't worry too much about light rain in NFL games. Obviously when it gets really heavy and monsoony, and then obviously some snow stuff that can impact weather too much. Some of that stuff can impact kickers a little bit. Some wind, 14 miles an hour. I'm seeing on NFLweather.com right now. So a little bit, but yeah, I mean, if you want to just use that as an argument where these teams may keep the ball on the ground a little bit more, sure. I think that's a fine take. Don't have a big issue with it. All right, let's go over to the Chiefs side on the ground. And, I'm sure, as I mentioned, Philadelphia this year, not the same defense that they were in 2022, right? Teams have been able to score points on the Eagles. That has really come through the air. They still have one of the best front sevens in the league, especially the defensive line, obviously adding Jalen Carter to that mix. Like, this is a team that's hard to run on. So as much as we've liked the ascension of Isaiah Pacheco's role this year, when he hits a ceiling, especially at a 7-2 tag here, that's got to come between the tackles to an extent. And he's been involved in the passing game, sure. But I don't know how much I love like similar ownership and captain ownership to DeAndre Swift. I know it's more expensive to get the Swift. Give me that side all the time. How are you feeling about Pacheco here?
Yeah, that's kind of the side that I lean on too. When I was writing up this game and really before I had even run ownership, I kind of had the sense that because of the matchup concerns, because of the love for all the pass catchers, because of the kind of the mid-tier price tag that I thought would get lost in the shuffle, I kind of had the sense that Pacheco would go a little bit overlooked and as a result be kind of under-owned relative to how frequently I think he ends up being optimal. After having a chance to digest the slate a little bit more, really dive into, you're looking at how do constructions work, how do salaries play with one another. I think Pacheco at 7,200 is going to end up being a little bit more popular than we're projecting right now. He is the 2.5-point home favorite, which I think will kind of balance out the matchup related concerns. I think people will still be concerned enough that it doesn't get totally blown out. And yeah, I mean, this is a really tough matchup against a Philly run defense that ranks second in stuff rate, stuffing 51.6% of their rushing attempts against. And that's how Pacheco's going to get there. He's not really going to get there as a receiver. He's going to get there because of the, racking up, getting close to the 100-yard bonus, finding his way to the end zone on the ground. Those are the paths to success for Isaiah Pacheco. I don't want to say that I'm completely ruling him out. I don't want to say that I don't like him, but I'm kind of with you that if given the option to choose, I would prefer the other side of the ball with DeAndre Swift in the backfield as opposed to the Chiefs backfield with Pacheco. Kind of a similar setup for those two guys if you really think about it, because on the Chiefs side, Jerick McKinnon is going to eat into a lot of those pass game opportunities, just like we expect Kenny Gainwell to eat into for the Eagles. So, looks like a similar spot. I think the $1,200 discount for Pacheco is nice, but I think you're going to see that end up ultimately coming with a little bit more ownership, although we're not kind of projecting it right now.
Yeah, I'm just not that into it. And, not necessarily trending in the best direction from him from a ceiling perspective. To back-to-back games of only 6 DraftKings points. And if you really look at his game log the whole year, we had the one game against the Jets where he hit 28. That would obviously be a score that you would run away with on a main slate for a running back, let alone a showdown slate. But besides that, he's kind of just been right in that 15, 16 point range at 7-2 with all these studs. I don't know if that would get it done for you tonight. It could. And his big game was against the Jets. The Jets are susceptible on the ground as well. So I think a lot of him is matchup based, which is kind of why I'm a little bit more interested in McKinnon here. But again, another price. You mentioned the kind of parallels here between him and Gainwell. I like McKinnon a little bit more just because we have such a history of him scoring some of these passing touchdowns and red zone type touchdowns. And, he had a receiving touchdown in week 9. He had 2 in week 3. Like he jumps off for those games every now and then. You just never know. So I like to kind of just mix him into just look at him as another pass catching option for Patrick or Mahomes and just kind of throw him into all my rules with that stuff personally. That's how I like to handle McKinnon.
Kind of with you on that. Obviously going to get those long down and distance plus 2-minute opportunities. Could be out there for a few more just kind of base down pass game work type scenarios. This isn't an Eagles defense that really inflates target rates to opposing running backs, but this is like a true dead zone where he's kind of cheap enough that you can talk yourself into the so bad that it's good type play. 6.4 base projection at 5,600 is not going to find his way into a ton of optimal lineups. So it's something that if you do want a little bit more of McKinnon and you're using an optimizer, you probably need to bump up a little bit. But I feel really good about his ownership staying where it's at or even coming in a little bit lower. This is a really tough price tag to fit. And if you're looking at, the sim bros and the opto bros that are playing around with the lineups, you can get guys that have a similar base projection and are like 2K, 3K cheaper. So this is one of those spots where I think McKinnon's, likely to be kind of in that sub 10 to low teens range in terms of his actual ownership.
Yeah, somebody that I would take some shots on in large field for sure. But yeah, I agree. It's hard to get too excited. Any love for CEH making the pool? He's had like between 1 and 3 carries in each of the last 6 games.
No, not really. I mean, the thing is here, like that 2K price tag is a real price tag. We've got guys that are stone min that have a better base projection and really project for a better role. You got receivers that are the same price that have a way better role. I don't know if I'd even get to it in 150. It's kind of tough to get there. Fair
enough. All right, let's stay on the Chiefs side to talk pass catchers here. Let's start with the Travis Kelce conversation because I'm going to loop in tight end. 10K, obviously super expensive. I'm mostly joking about the Taylor Swift stuff. We're talking about what a 7 or 8 game sample of splits there. At home, extra motivation against his brother, all that stuff. I think that's more real than the Taylor Swift stuff probably is. He's their wide receiver 1, 2, and 3, and 57% total ownership, 13%. So around the same type of captain ownership as the quarterbacks. Massive ceiling. I haven't decided which way I'd go on Kelce yet tonight, but curious if you have a lean here.
Yeah, I think this is kind of the toughest spot on the slate. The 10K price tag is enough of a discount from the Mahomes Hurts group that it really makes you think about it. He's got obviously a lower base projection, but a really similar ceiling when you compare all of them together. And I think like his raw 90th plus percentile outcomes are very close to what we would expect a raw 90th percentile outcome to look like from Jalen Hurts or Patrick Mahomes. And you're seeing a little bit less captain ownership on him, and we just don't have a huge sample of what showdown ownership looks like for Travis Kelce, even without Tyreek Hill going back to last season. So I don't know what the field is going to do in this spot. Will the field just be a little bit more excited to roster Mahomes at 11-2, the higher base projection, be able to kind of double them up, get the classic Captain Mahomes double stacks, or will the field go to a little bit more Kelce as the alpha tight end one or wide receiver one pass catcher, who generally has been getting owned at a little bit higher rate this season? Ultimately, this spot for me is going to come down to where I think ownership lands. Right now, you see it's very close. I just don't have a great lean on which way I think it goes. If I had to choose straight up, I think I would prefer Kelce ahead of Mahomes at the captain spot. But I think he's owned relatively efficiently as a captain and a little bit over-owned as a flex. I think mostly you want these types of alpha wide receivers / tight ends in the captain spot. The Sims have kind of played that out over the course of the season, and I think the results have been there for that as well. So for me, I'm looking at Kelce at captain. I'm hoping that our 13.5% projected ownership on him in that spot is fairly close to what his ceiling would be. We'll talk about another pass catcher in a second here on the other side that I think could see a massive ownership jump from where we're projecting right now. I don't necessarily see that with Kelce. So as a result, I think he's a pretty awesome captain play.
Yeah, I completely agree. 58% in the flex or whatever, 58% total own. The flex ownership there, I agree, is probably a little high. I mean, at 10K, if Travis Kelce's sitting a ceiling, I think you want him in your captain spot. Now, there's a chance that 3 studs go off in this game. And, just the way salary shakes out, maybe it's not, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Mahomes is your captain. It could be a cheap captain in that sense, or one of the other studs. So I think, when I'm at least making that decision between Mahomes and Kelce, and I'm trying to play them together, which is obviously something I'd want to do, especially when one's in the captain spot. I think I'd want to get overweight on Kelce captain and not worry too much about my flex ownership there. Is kind of where I'd be there. Let's talk about Noah Gray. Let's just stay on tight ends here for a second. Been, I think, a pretty good player, obviously blocked by the best tight end in the league, but 1,800, we mentioned the necessity for salary relief here. 13% total ownership, has an 11.5 ceiling projection. He'll be out there quite, a bit. What kind of, or what stood out to you about Noah Gray when you were doing some research, and is he one of your top priorities as a discount piece here?
Yeah, I think he is, which feels bad, but 1,800, you've got the sub 2K price tag. He's going to be running a route on 52% of Patrick Mahomes' dropbacks. He has an 83% catchable target rate. So a couple of things stand out. Going to be out there a bunch. The Chiefs love the 2 tight end sets. This is we had talked about earlier in the season that playing the Eagles was a great matchup for opposing tight ends. Not necessarily the case anymore. It's still an above average matchup, I believe, for the tight end position. You get the sub 2K price tag out there for a bunch of Mahomes dropbacks, very high catchable target rate, which you can't say about all these cheap guys on this team. And if we're expecting all of these studs to play the way we expect these studs to play, AJB, Travis Kelce, Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, you need kind of a floor a little bit, especially in cash game contests, to allow all of these things to work. I think Noah Gray is the easiest way to access that kind of, it's a pretty low floor, pretty low ceiling type situation here, or pretty high floor, pretty low ceiling type situation here. But I think you've got a pretty good range on Noah Gray, specifically for cash game contests. I do think that high floor, that nice base projection at the sub 2K price tag could result in him steaming up a little bit in tournaments, which at that point I would kind of shy away. But I do think it's one of the better roles of these really, really cheap guys.
Would you make rules with him and Kelce, or would you just look at him as like, hey, this is another cheap option on the slate? I'm not going to worry too much about it.
Yep, that's exactly right. I don't really consider him a direct backup or a direct replacement to Travis Kelce or anything like that, or he's stealing direct targets away from Kelce or vice versa. I just think this is another guy that, because they run enough 2 tight end sets, is going to be out there enough, and his route participation here is strong enough for me, regardless of what Kelce does, that I don't mind playing him with Taylor Swift's boyfriend.
All right, let's have the Rashee Rice conversation, because I definitely think, and salary and projection and everything also, agrees here, but I think he's in a tier of his own of this hodgepodge of Chiefs receivers here. So 7,400, talented rookie. I mean, I think all the advanced stuff still is pretty. I know for a while there at the very beginning of the season, like his targets per route run and all that stuff was like top 5 in the league. You tell me, I haven't caught up on where those numbers still lie, but we would hope to see an even bigger role coming out of the bye. The classic rookie receiver coming out of the bye, gets a bigger role in the offense. I think Mahomes likes throwing to him. I think he's the most talented of this group. 22.4 ceiling projection seems okay. 26.7% total ownership. I like that number. 5% captain, kind of efficient as well. I wouldn't mind taking shots there. Definitely the guy I'm most interested in, but that 7,400 number, same price as Pacheco, not necessarily an easy one to get to.
Yeah, I was kind of with you. This felt like the classic, rookie coming out of the bye spot. I think he passes the eye test. I think anybody that's watched a Chiefs game would say that he's the best wide receiver, the best true wide receiver on this team. He's got the draft capital. There's just your words, hodgepodge of wide receivers behind him. And it kind of feels like it's naturally trending in the right direction. And then you read some of the quotes over the bye week from the Chiefs wide receiver coach, from the offensive coordinator, Matt Nagy. And it just kind of seems like this is the role this guy's going to play, where it's like 50% route participation one week, 60% the next, 45 the following. And it's really bizarre, but it kind of seems like this either A, this natural progression, or B, as they've alluded to, the Chiefs wide receiver coach, that is kind of this hot hand type of thing. So as reading his quotes directly, Connor Embry, the Chiefs wide receiver coach, Rashee Rice is coming along throughout the season. I like where he's at. He's working well, working hard every day. Then the snap count, it just depends. We've got 7 to 8 receivers. So it's kind of whoever has the hot hand will keep feeding. Then it's next up mentality and stay ready. That's part of the learning experience, Embry explained. Most of the guys in this room, they've played every snap their whole life. They've always been out. They've been the best guy out there and never off the field. So that's a learning experience where you have to learn, hey, this game I might get 15 reps. The next game I might get 40, like we're talking about with Rashee. What? We're doing hot hand approach with the Chiefs' best wide receiver. What is? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills.
It's a true classic example of like fantasy community and NFL hardo coaching staff community, just like being on completely different pages here. Fantasy, gambling, advanced analytics, all that stuff. Really, really nuts.
So that kind of leads me to like my fantasy position on tonight for Rashee Rice, right? I think he's fairly closely priced to what like a ceiling should be right now for him. And maybe he continues to go out and impress from a yards per route run and targets per route run basis. 7,400 is a hefty tag for him. And I think his projection is pretty full at 11.4. Like and I'm not going to suggest this behind the scenes because I've made some projection adjustment declarations on past slates and have been proven wrong. I think our projection team is fantastic and they've got this in the right spot. But if I were to suggest it one way or another, I would probably have it down just kind of based off some of the comments from the Chiefs offensive coordinator and wide receiver coach, where this is kind of truly more of a hot hand situation where if guys are rolling, they're going to keep them out there a little bit more than maybe we would expect. So long story short on Rashee Rice, priced fairly, priced fully. Ownership is still up there at 26.7%. That's not nothing. And I think our projection on him is pretty full. So if anything, I think I'm going to end up coming in underweight on, I get it. It could look bad because I think he is the Chiefs' best wide receiver, but I think I'm going to end up coming in a little bit underweight here.
Okay. Yeah. I don't have much to add there. I think I would just take the okay, even if it's a 50% snap share week or whatever, let me take the shot and just say that he has by far the chance to produce the most on that participation than anyone else here. And I do believe in that. So I do like the idea of taking some shots there for sure. And I would put him in a tier of his own. Let's talk about the rest of these guys though, because this is where it really just becomes throw your hands up in the air, make some decisions. We could talk about maybe some negative correlations here, right? So MVS and Justin Watson, right? Very low floor players, but they're out there the most. They take shots downfield to these guys. There's going to be 1 or 2 weeks every season where they are going to be relevant. Is this one of those weeks? I don't know. Justin Watson coming with the ownership because of the price and, just the raw projection from being out there about the same exact thing as MVS, but you save $600. Any takes or thoughts on these two and what's your level of interest on these two players?
Yeah, these guys are necessary evils, and you see them with basically the same base projection. They are going to be out there a lot. I think these are kind of the two primary perimeter wide receivers that the Chiefs feel most comfortable about on an every down type basis, and that's why you're still seeing decent base projection on them, relatively speaking. Justin Watson to me stands out as probably the best if you're forced to go there in cash game contests. And I'm not sure you're necessarily forced to go that direction with Noah Gray available, with some of these really cheap stone min options available. But I think if you do find yourself in that direction, Justin Watson's the best. A 71% route participation last week was a season high for him. He's got a 15% targets per route run rate on the season. And I don't generally like attacking these low volume, high ADOT guys in cash. But if I'm concerned that like all of these guys are low volume, at least if Justin Watson comes down with one, I feel pretty good about it coming deep downfield, which means, low volume, he could pay off his price tag with just a couple of targets. So I think Justin Watson's, probably the best non-Rashee Rice pass catcher, best non-Travis Kelce / Rashee Rice pass catcher here when you factor in price tag. That's going to result in some ownership. You're seeing 21.2%. I think it could end up being higher in tournaments as well. So keep an eye out for that. From a correlation standpoint, it feels like I'm maybe being a little bit too restrictive here, but I think considering like a max one of him and Marquez Valdes-Scantling is totally fine. And if you don't want to go as far as saying a max one, a very serious negative doc on those two guys. And then to take that to the next group of guys, I think I feel very similar about that with Mecole Hardman and Kadarius Toney. They traded for Mecole Hardman ahead of week 7. And basically since then, those two guys are now sharing the role that was previously occupied by Kadarius Toney 100% of the time. So now you're taking a guy who was already a very low route participation guy and making him an even lower route participation guy by kind of splitting his target and route opportunities in half a little bit, right? Mecole Hardman's 2,800, Kadarius Toney's 4,200. Very redundant roles, which means that their ceilings are going to end up being, slashed in half by one another. If forced to choose between these guys, I prefer Hardman mostly because of price tag, but he's actually running more routes and has had a higher target share since coming back to the Chiefs in week 7. That's another one where I'm totally okay if you want to go and be as restrictive as a max one rule. Max one, Kadarius Toney and Mecole Hardman. And then at least that way, if you're doing that and you're getting some Mahomes doubles, some Mahomes triples, you're not getting this like Mahomes plus Toney and Hardman or Mahomes plus MVS and Justin Watson. I think those guys have very similar roles and they're in direct competition, not only for targets, but also for playing time.
Yeah, I think that's a great breakdown. I might take the Toney side just because I still, for some stupid reason, believe in the talent when he's out on the field more than Hardman. But, that 2,800 versus 4,200 is a real thing. I agree with, at the very least, very strong negative docs between MVS and Watson, negative docs between Hardman and Toney. Where do you slide Sky more into those rules? Because, we saw a big dip in route participation before the bye. I think you had mentioned 29% or something along those lines. Someone that I'm completely out on the talent at this point. But, I think not fully ready to give up on him are the Chiefs, and he'll be out there a little bit.
Yeah, I don't think that 29% route participation is necessarily sticky, but right. He does slide in behind MVS, behind Justin Watson, probably still behind Mecole for me. And then somewhere kind of in that range between, Mecole, Kadarius Toney, Sky Moore would be that other group. You could probably just include Sky in any of those other max one rules that were kind of outlined there. He's going to get in as a slot. He's going to get in a little bit on the perimeter, but I think if Sky is getting there, it probably results in one of these other guys having a relatively poor performance.
Yep. Yeah, I think I do just want to take the salary discounts here, even if it comes with a little more ownership on Noah Gray and Justin Watson, right? Justin Watson, 8 targets over his last 2 games. Noah Gray just seems to get a 2 for 30 every now and then. You never know if one of those might fall into the end zone, and just everyone else is so dart throwy. And yeah, maybe you'll need one of them, but I'd rather just kind of include Rashee Rice as like one of the few guys I'm actually considering on this slate and just get in where you fit in on these other guys with the rules, right? If you're using an optimizer, make the rules you want to make. If you have a lean on someone, sure, give them a thumbs up, boost their projection a little bit, dock somebody else conversely, if that's how you're feeling. But I don't think any of us are smart enough to make any real distinctions here other than, hey, this is the data. This is how much these guys are playing. This is how many routes they're running. Do with that information what you will,
And that's a good point for the optimizer too. If you don't have great conviction on these guys, you can either crank up the variance so you're not getting too much of one particular guy. You can consider min-max rules. I wouldn't necessarily go that route, but I think the last thing you want is to say, okay, I kind of like these secondary, tertiary Chiefs wide receivers, at least where they're priced and owned. And then the last thing you want is like, okay, I don't really have great conviction on any one particular guy, but then you run the optimizer for 150. and all of a sudden it spits out 45% Justin Watson. You're like, well, I like these secondary Chiefs wide receivers. I don't like this one guy that much, though.
Yeah.
So I think, considering how to kind of maneuver throughout the optimizer to get the types of exposures that fit with your brain is the best way to handle this secondary and tertiary Chiefs wide receiver group. One thing I think I kind of glossed over, and we both glossed over a little bit, was just how good this matchup is for the Chiefs wide receivers as a whole. It's really kind of a stone nut spot, which is crazy considering we kind of like the individual nature of the Eagles cornerbacks, but I don't know if they've lost a step or maybe it's still small sample randomness. But in terms of just target share allowed, in terms of yards allowed, touchdowns allowed, this team is kind of dead last in all of those categories. The Eagles are against wide receivers. So I think it is a good spot to attack, even though targets are very evenly distributed here. I do want some exposure to that, and maybe that's a slight boost to somebody like Rashee Rice. So hated to kind of go to super negative on Rashee Rice. I do still like him as a player. Do still think he's the Chiefs' most likely wide receiver one, and this is a good spot. I'm just a little bit concerned about the price tag and some of the coaching comments, which is maybe me reading too much into it.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of things. I think it's Jonathan Gannon departs, so they're running a little bit of a new, defense. They lose Gardner Johnson. I think Matt's right that Bradbury's lost a step a little bit here. Darius Slay's no spring chicken at this point. He's been in the league for a long time. So I just think, the idea that they were going to repeat last year's performance at all three levels on defense just wasn't happening. So it's kind of in the secondary where it's taking a hit. And that makes some sense to me. All right, let's go over to Philadelphia. We spent a lot of time on KC, but I think that was a very important conversation. This will not be as long of a conversation. Let's start with the two alphas here. Well, we should say what we thought was definitely an alpha, a 1A, 1B thing coming into the season, and has proven to be a 1 and a 2 thing. And that's because A.J. Brown is in the running for Offensive Player of the Year. True, absolute dynamo alpha is A.J. Brown. 10-2. So you get a discount from the quarterbacks, but we do have our highest captain projected ownership percentage on the slate. Individual matchup, L'Jarius Sneed, you can make an argument if that's what you want to be your coin flip to come in under, fine. But there's just no doubt that this has been one of the 2 or 3 best fantasy receivers all season.
Yeah, but I mentioned a guy that I think his ownership in small and large field tournaments, small field specifically, because I know there's a lot of sim users, a lot of opto bros in there. This is the one captain ownership that's going to get totally blown out. Charlie C. Nunn asked me in the Established Run Discord, who's going to come in higher, Travis Kelce or A.J. Brown. I said A.J. Brown 100% of the time. I think there's a chance, and we'll probably make some final ownership adjustments here to kind of reflect my feelings on this. I think there's a chance that we see like 25% A.J. Brown just because of that alpha wide receiver one nature. Any sim user is going to love that. You get the discount. Look at the ceiling. If you just sort by ceiling on this slate, he's got a 3-point higher ceiling than his own quarterback, then Mahomes, like a 5-point higher ceiling than Kelce. So I think anyone optimizing by ceiling is going to get a bunch of A.J. Brown. And I mean, it makes sense. It makes sense. It's a massive role for one of the most talented wide receivers in the entire league, right up there in terms of role plus talent combination with Stephon Diggs, Tyreek Hill, in a better offense, obviously, than Garrett Wilson. So, I mean, there's really no negatives for A.J. Brown. The one negative you already pointed out was L'Jarius Sneed. With guys like this, man, I'm just not super worried about defensive cornerback matchups versus a wide receiver like A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown's going to get his, and it's not something that concerns me. Really, the only thing I think I'm considering is how high does this captain ownership get? I think if it's 20, 21, 22% feels pretty good. I'll still probably come in around that number. Our Sims love it. If I get the sense that it's going to get really, really blown out and maybe in some really small field stuff, it's like 30%, then I would much rather just come in under, take my shots on Mahomes and Kelce and Hurts and those types of guys. But as it stands right now, I think A.J. Brown's a fantastic play.
This feels like an A.J. Brown spot to me. The outdoor Arrowhead, kind of big, huge game, maybe gets a little physical. However, if you want to flip this slate on its head, and these guys should be separated by more than 1,200. But one way you can get real unique, real fast, if you just flip those ownership numbers on Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown, and we mentioned the tight nature of pricing on the slate, that 1,200 will go a long way from you if you did that. Say you took 16% Devonta Smith and captain or 20% Devonta Smith and captain. I don't think it's a crazy thing to do. I still think this guy's a top 12 talent receiver in the league. It's just that A.J. Brown has forced himself into being a top 2 or 3, and they're running a lot of the offense through him. You never know. I mean, Devonta Smith he's got that ceiling in there. He was a yard away from the bonus 2 weeks ago, which would have put him close to 30 points. So like those games are still in the bag for Devonta Smith. It's just that we've seen these massive ceiling games for AJ Brown, which makes that argument to do that kind of flip, that ownership flip, which is kind of something that I probably long ago would have loved to do. Something I'd still consider here, but it's risky.
Yeah, this is a tough spot. 9K. He should probably be right, a little bit closer to, I don't know. He should probably be like 8,200. So he's not.
Yeah, Swift. He should be by Swift. He's like
by Swift. Yeah, like 82, 8,400, maybe a little bit more expensive than Pacheco and Rashee Rice, but not more expensive than DeAndre Swift for the production that we've gotten from him. 21.1% target share, still a pretty big 29.6% air yard share. He's had 2, I guess, ceiling games, 22.9 and 26.1 DraftKings points. So we know he can still do it. But man, I mean, like, he's just too close to AJ Brown. And so like from a cash game or optimal type perspective, I don't think you can go there at all. I'm hopeful, cautiously optimistic that the price tag is going to result in a little bit lower ownership, both at flex and at captain. And maybe if it does come down to that 5 or 6% range at captain, I would feel a lot more comfortable about it. But you're right. This is the one way to flip the build a little bit, get a little bit more unique. And if you want to play into that L'Jarius Sneed stuff, like what's the best way to leverage that is L'Jarius Sneed locks up AJ Brown. They do battle back and forth. AJ Brown gets him a couple of times. L'Jarius Sneed gets him a couple of times. Ends up being kind of a meh game from AJ Brown. If that's the case, there's no Dallas Goedert. The wide receiver 3 here is Olamide Zaccheaus and Julio Jones. This would be the spot that if you think AJ Brown kind of gets locked up a little bit, Devonta Smith could finally go off. So I think there's enough pointing in the right direction that if we're going to get low ownership, I do like Devonta Smith here. You've got to kind of convince me that he's going to be, 5, 6, 7% owned kind of at max. If it gets much more than that, I think I would just prefer to go to some of these other studs.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think on a 1-game slate where anything's possible and we still know that the ceiling's in there, I'm willing to be a little bit more aggressive here on Devonta, but I know that the floor can drop out on you there. Also, I think the Goddard thing's big here. I thought this take from Matt was interesting. That Rich Rebar had wrote that when Goddard was out last year, they did not get the tight ends involved. Did the Eagles very, very rarely. So we'll talk about those guys in a second. But what I want to get at is we could see Raiders level concentration offense here, right? The running back and the 2 receivers, and that's who's involved. Sure, we'll get some of these. Well, I guess let's use this to talk about Julio Jones and Zaccheaus here. So two ex-Falcon legends, Zaccheaus and Julio Jones, are battling out for that wide receiver 3 in Philadelphia now. Julio, still a big body. You never know. I wouldn't be surprised to see him get an end zone target here or there. Zaccheaus a little bit more of a role, kind of the incumbent, been there all season. I guess, just give me that discount on Zaccheaus, who also is projecting a little bit better. But I really wouldn't try to play these 2 guys together for that exact reason of how concentrated I think it's going to be up top. And I think they're just fine options. Probably prefer Noah Gray and Justin Watson. But again, there's a chance somebody pops here because of the lack of usage of tight end with that Goddard. And, if they do successfully take out Brown or Devonta, then there's a chance one of these 2 guys pops.
Yep, I'm with you. I think for me, Zaccheaus would be that guy. $1,200. He's obviously cheaper than Julio Jones, which I think matters on this slate. He's got a higher route participation rate since joining the team. Zaccheaus, that is 56% to 32%. Higher target share, higher air yard share. I'm with you on a max 1 in this spot. What you're kind of hoping for, obviously, touchdown would be phenomenal. You're kind of hoping for a couple of targets because Goddard's gone. These guys get used a little bit more in through wide receiver sets, and those few targets just result in enough DraftKings points that it kind of works out. I don't think you're going to get that from both of them. So for me, it would be a max 1 spot. And for me, I prefer Zaccheaus as the guy that I want in a majority of my lineup. In a majority of my lineups where I'm using an Eagles wide receiver 3, I would prefer him over Julio.
Yeah, and I think these guys get boosts for me in Hurts captain lineups personally, because obviously Hurts can get there with one of the 2 big guys and then a couple rushing touchdowns. But if you want to take big stands on Hurts and captain and kind of play the slate this way, these are interesting doubles, right? And I also think a lot of the field might throw it on Jack Stoll or Garrett Alcantara, or I guess we could talk about Albert O here and that be the double piece. But I don't know how many people will throw it with one of the 2 receivers and then one of the wide receiver 3/4s here as a double Hurts option. So I think that's an interesting, maybe slightly unique way to attack it. Tight ends. Jack Stoll, we are projecting to have the biggest role here. Guy, Grant Calcaterra had, I think is this his first game back all year?
Second?
He's not been second. Yeah, he hasn't really been around. I know that.
Yeah.
Alberto, they bring him in off waivers. I think another Howie Roseman, people consider that a super sharp move. This is a guy we were talking about just 18 months ago as a potential top 10 fantasy tight end. I know you were getting a lot of questions about him earlier in the day. He's only 400. I'm not playing two of these guys together. There's just no way, personally. Do you have any hunch, any lean? Have you read anything about which of these tight ends are going to be used? How would you like to attack these guys? And do you have any kind of context to add to the projections here?
Yeah, it's just a giant shrug for me. I kind of agree with where the projections are at, but I don't know how you can feel super confident in this. I don't have a great read. Haven't seen anything that you guys haven't seen either. I think Jack Stoll is likely to be, or is the most likely body to take over as kind of the tight end one. He is definitely not Dallas Goedert. Shout out Cornhuskers, former Nebraska product. Jack Stoll is not a pass catching tight end by any stretch. Big bodied guy, but not somebody that you would expect to go out there and get 6, 7, 8 targets like we would from Dallas Goedert. So I think he's going to be out there mostly for blocking purposes. I believe he'll lead the position for the Eagles in routes run and is the most likely tight end one on this team while Dallas Goedert is out. I don't think that necessarily means he's going to pay off a $3,200 price tag and or be optimal. The one thing that keeps Grant Calcaterra in play and Alberto, I suppose, to a little bit lesser degree, at least in my opinion, Grant Calcaterra is the stone min on DraftKings. I also don't think he's a super great pass catcher, but he at least showed a little bit of pass catching chops in college at SMU. In his final season in 12 games, he went 38, 465, and 4 for a college tight end. It's okay. But boy, it's pretty ugly here. We don't have somebody stepping into a really nice role that we think is a really good pass catcher. I think Alberto will be active, will be out there, but I also think he's a tight end 3, which, tight end 3 probably means like a 10 to 15% route participation rate, maybe 20% if he shows well early and they feel like they need to keep him out there. But yeah, he's $400. He should make your MME player pool. I just don't have a ton of confidence that he's going to be, hauling in receptions and become a necessary piece on tonight's build.
Yeah. I don't have anything to add. Nothing to add. I don't know. And this is kind of one of those situations that if you have the time between now and 8:30 or 8:15 when this game starts, just see whatever. If I would have, I'd just be grinding the beats, see if you get any kind of edge here about what packages look like in warmups or any kind of notes that come out, because I could see this being a spot that matters. I could also see it being completely irrelevant. So, I really don't know. I know that doesn't help you out too much, but I just don't know what to tell you on that front.
This does feel like a classic preseason type spot where there's like a legitimate information edge. If it's out there, if the information is out there, you can see a beat reporter tweet something out or a coach say something in a press conference. Yep. but I don't know if that information will be made public or if it'll end up being meaningful. But I agree with you that if you've got a little bit of time between now and before slate locks, if you can find out who's going to be the tight end one here or how they're going to deploy these guys, could be a little bit of an edge on this slate.
Yeah, no, totally. And I know so many of you are going to be like me and are going to be watching the Knicks Minnesota Timberwolves over this game too. But it's I'm double screening it tonight. I'm very excited. All right,
there we go.
Let's talk kickers and defense. Jake Elliott, Harrison Butker, both kickers over 5K here, which I guess at this point we're kind of seeing these high flying offenses or high profile offenses. Those are the ones that the kickers kind of get over that 5K number. Makes them hard to get to, so you're not seeing too much total ownership on them. What are your thoughts on the two kickers tonight?
Yeah, they're expensive. They don't really fit roster construction. You're seeing a decent ownership projection on both of them right now, but I actually think that the ownership projections there could come down. As we've talked through this slate, you can see it continuously happen. Going to be very stars and scrubs heavy. Going to be a lot of A.J. Brown, Travis Kelce, Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, 3 or 4 of those guys in a lot of lineups. And if you've got 3 or 4 of those guys in a lot of lineups, I'm sorry, you just don't have $5,200 to spend on Jake Elliott. You don't have $5K to spend on Harrison Butker. I think as a result, if you can find your way into lineups that maybe have 2 or 3 of those top studs and expect 1 or 2 of those top studs to fail, one way that happens is there's a lot less touchdown production than maybe would be expected if 4 of those guys are really going off. So if you've only got 2 or 3 of those guys in a lineup, I think that these 5K price tags on these kickers actually make them pretty appealing tournament plays, because if they're failing, that probably means a few more field goal opportunities are available, or if they're at least failing relative to their salary expectations, a few more opportunities for field goals. So I do like Jake Elliott, Harrison Butker in tournaments if they are capped around kind of that 17 to 20% projected ownership. Then as far as DSTs go, I mean, DSTs aren't going to be played here. I think we're even a little bit high on 16.7 for the Eagles, 17.9 for the Chiefs as well. Part of that's because when you start to load in lineups that have 2 to 3 pieces from each side, you just don't want to throw in a DST there. It doesn't feel good when you've got 2 to 3 offensive pieces on either side. So I don't think the Chiefs and or the Eagles will be used all that much. And part of the same reason, 4K price tag when you've got some guys that are fairly cheaper, MVS has a higher base projections, $1,000 cheaper. You've got Justin Watson, who's $1,600 less than the Eagles defense, has a higher base projection. Part of that is going to squeeze them out of optimal runs, and you're not going to see them come through quite a bit. But I do like using these DSTs. For me, mostly I'll use the Chiefs in 4-2 KC heavy builds or 5-1 KC heavy builds. And for the Eagles, I'll use the Eagles DST in 2-4 Eagles heavy builds or 5-1 or 1-5 Eagles heavy builds. So trying to structure how I use them in lineups that I think kind of make sense from a storytelling standpoint.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. I think the DSTs are interesting contrarian pieces tonight. And I do have a lean on kicker. Give me Butker over Elliott tonight. I think a lot. First of all, 200 will matter. I think every dollar matters as we kind of have gone through this. But just the amount that Philadelphia goes for it on 4th and 1, the amount of finishers, we've talked about this all season, kind of Philadelphia is those classic finishers, especially with the lack of quote unquote receiver talent around KC. This is a home matchup for Butker. It's where he practices. He knows that, just overall, I think there's a definitely enough like tiny micro edges in my thinking here for me to like Butker quite a bit over Jake Elliott tonight if I'm picking a kicker personally. Okay. That does it. No time for questions here as we've kind of gone close to an hour, which not surprising. Big game. Very excited for it all. Cody, take it away though. It's hilarious. I think we're putting some great shows out there. I really do. I think our show on Thursday was awesome. I think this was another good one, but we cannot freaking get flag plants right. At least I can. So, what hopefully this is where we flip it up. What do you got tonight?
Well, that's how it goes. I mean, these things, like if they hit at like when we're trying to call out like optimal captains and things like that, that aren't super owned, if these things hit at like a 10 to 15% clip, 1 out of every 5 to 10 shows that we do, we're feeling pretty damn good about ourselves, and our bankroll is probably pretty good. So I'm going to go back to that guy that I think is going to be very certainly sub 10% owned at captain. Maybe he gets squeezed even a little bit more because the price tag isn't nearly as palatable as it is on some of these other guys. I still think he has slate winning upside. I still think he could be a very legitimately good wide receiver 1B to one of the NFL's best overall receivers, Devonta Smith at 9K. A little bit of a so bad that it's good. He's a little bit too expensive, but not so much so that I think it's completely prohibitive. Still has a decent target share, I think, which will increase in games without Dallas Goedert. Still has a pretty strong air yard share as a downfield threat. I'm not super worried about L'Jarius Sneed on A.J. Brown, but if you are, it's just kind of another feather in your cap there. I think this is a game where Devonta Smith does get on the scoreboard. Even if A.J. Brown has a great game, I think this could be a game where Devonta Smith ends up being optimal captain worthy. So give me Devonta Smith at 7.1% captain ownership.
Yeah, I knew one of us was going to go there. It's the one that does stand out like a sore thumb from a captain perspective. From a flag plant perspective on this slate for like getting over the field on captain, the price being a little bit too high, but we know that there's a ceiling still in there. I'll do everyone a favor, and I have a couple Eagles that I like here, but I'll go away from us both kind of doubling down on an offensive piece for the same team. I feel like every time we've done that, it's gone poorly. And I know I did the Marvin Mims thing recently, and I feel like I've been doing the rookie receiver thing, but the only other guy that I was even considering in a similar way, at least if I'm not going on Eagles, is Rashee Rice. Listen, the coach speak is real and it's scary. And maybe we get a 44% target snap share tonight just because they're being stupid. But we've seen in the 60s, hopefully we get upwards of 70. You never know. Maybe he just looks so good on his first couple drives that the coaches have to keep him out there. Or maybe he's just out there for 55 to 60% of snaps and he's still able to get 5 for 80 and 2 touchdowns, which I think would definitely get it done for Rashee Rice at only 5% captain. I do like getting over the field there for sure. And, that probably means a little bit of a Travis Kelce fade, which is, I think, also something I'm comfortable with tonight. Although, again, I still haven't fully made up my mind on the Kelce front. Yeah. I think that's a big decision point. But I do know I like the Rashee Rice of it also. All right, there you have it. Rashee Rice Devonta Smith, some kind of secondary pass catching options for you on both teams. Excited for this one, Cody. Really hope that it comes through. Again, not sure our entire Thanksgiving schedule yet. I know there's a Friday Island game also. We'll be back with all of you guys before that. You keep an eye on socials to get all of our content scheduled. Cody, do you have anything for the people before we sign off here?
Last thing, consistent plug on the Establish the Run Discord. A lot of good analysis going on in there. And if you have questions closer to lock, usually I am in there answering them. And check out the Showdown Sim Analysis, which Gary has the tab up, but we're trying to keep that for subscribers only. It's been hugely beneficial to my own process, to a lot of the guys that are playing Showdown at Establish the Run as well. So I think you'll find a bunch of value there. Just some blurbs on how players interact in our optimal lineups based off of the 20,000 simulations that we're running. I think it's a huge value add for all the Showdown subscribers. So check it out if you have not yet, and hope this slate plays a little bit better than the Thursday night slate with the Ravens and the Bengals.
Absolutely. All right, guys. Best of luck tonight. Enjoy the football. If we do not speak to you before Thanksgiving, because I think we know that the ETR will have Drew and Mike's show and everything like that behind the paywall. So I don't know if we'll have any kind of Showdown specific content from a show perspective on Thanksgiving. So I wouldn't anticipate seeing you guys before Thursday. So I just want to wish you all a very happy Thanksgiving. Hope you're all able to be with friends and family and loved ones, and are a lot to be thankful for this year. We're thankful for all of you tuning in. We will see you all at the very least by next week, but hopefully sooner than that as well. Okay. Take care, everyone.